And I feel like in L&D, if you make something subpar, you just won't hear about it afterwards, right? Because it's good enough, right? Like it did have all of the legal pieces that needed to be hit, or all the legal beats that needed to be hit for that session, and it did have a quiz and you could track it. And so like the leader's not going to come back and say, can we make this better? And the audience is going to grumble while they take it, and they're going to maybe watch something else while they take it and then run through the quiz, right? But there's just like not a big feedback loop, but that feedback loop does exist. It's just long terms.
Welcome to Talk Learning with me. I'm Joseph Diaz, a learning and enablement professional, passionate about connecting with others and having conversations that open up new perspectives, broaden understanding, and encourage growth. In this podcast, I talk learning with talented guests and curious professionals to build a shared language that helps us grow in our work and our careers. Today's episode is special. We recorded this one in person in my office, so if you want to see the setup, check out the video on Spotify or YouTube. I'm joined by Tom Jager, an award-winning learning and development leader and area L&D manager at Smurfit Westrock. Tom blends academic grounding with real-world execution. His work focuses on driving business outcomes, elevating the learner experience, and designing resources that actually work in the environments learners operate in. In this conversation, we dig into what it really means to create learning that's so good, people would be willing to pay for it. Not flash for the sake of flash, but intentional, high-quality design that respects context, community, and performance. On that note, let's talk about creating value. We're live.
We're live.
All right, Tom, welcome to the show, and also welcome to my office. We're here in person, kind of sweet.
Yeah, thanks for indulging me. And so for anyone listening, if you do go watch the video, I'm not sure if you'll host it on YouTube or Spotify. I live close enough to Joseph that we were able to do this in person. And so we have a kind of a Jimmy rig setup right now so that we can be in the same room, and we're mostly happy with it. So.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, mostly happy, because I think there's always little things we could tweak. But if you're listening on audio only, would encourage you to even just go check it out for a minute or two. Let us know what you think of the in-person setup. It was a ton of fun to mess around with and set up. So yeah, thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
Yeah, if you're curious what we used, I mean, we've got some webcams, basically 2 key lights and a tube light, and maybe the tightest office that you can film in together, but I think it's working out. It looked okay.
It is definitely the tightest office, but yeah. I love it. I'm all here for it. So Tom, before we get into our conversation today, for people who have never met you before and who don't know who you are, would you mind giving just a small little introduction about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Tom, by the way. Hi, everyone. So currently I'm an area learning and development manager at Smurfit Westrock. Smurfit Westrock is the largest, or at least one of the top 2 paper packaging manufacturer in the world. So I cover the Intermountain area, which is 3 states, so Utah, Colorado, and Idaho, and I travel between their manufacturing sites to make sure that their training is both up to date and working well. On top of that, I work on enterprise solutions. My background's in instructional design. As a little shout out, Joseph and I went to the same master's program. So we did our master's in instructional psychology and technology. And so I've been doing this for about 8 years now. I did my undergrad in business strategy, and I love L&D. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Yeah, I was going to call out the same thing, that we met in the master's program. And I think I always loved getting to talk with you then, because at the time you were working in corporate learning and development, and I was interested in that, but didn't have much exposure. So I always appreciated our chats, just getting to hear about the things that you were working on in your work and how you were kind of tying things from the program into your work, and then leveraging your work to also like double dip on the work that you were doing in the program. It was always a ton of fun to hear. And so that was why I was really excited to really kind of bring together this podcast episode to talk about, as we're working in learning and development, how can we create learning that is so good that people would be willing to pay for it? And so before we get really into the meat of that, I just want to ask, in your current role working for Smurfit Westrock and just the work that you do all around, what do you love the most about your role as a learning and development professional?
A great question. My favorite thing about the role right now is the main leader that I work with. So I work with an area level leader over the operations there. So he's the area VP, and he's really invested in learning, especially in leadership, and making sure his people have great experiences there. And then for those of you that work in L&D that listen to the podcast, you know that having a leader that cares about learning makes all the difference in the experience that you have. So while a lot of my day-to-day responsibilities can rotate around typical things that all of you would work on, like new hire orientation and onboarding, or like a 90-day ramp up, or some of those typical standard L&D oriented things, him and I get to work on some enterprise level things and some area level things that is just for fun. So as a well, not just for fun, for the business, but like stuff that I can be really passionate about and isn't as mundane as some of those day-to-day tasks. So as an example, today I was able to build out a simulation using Lovable, where they basically could pretend to be a general manager and they could like get revenue and scores and make decisions about communication and do other things. And I didn't know when I pitched this to Jason, who's the guy that I work with, that that was going to be possible. But he was like, sure, like go for it. And so I was up late last night making sure it was actually working. And then today we had 20 people competing with a leaderboard online in this simulation. And it wouldn't be possible without a leader that supported things like that.
That's super cool, because I think normally when I ask people, like, what do you love the most about your job? It is those nitty gritty day-to-day things that you mentioned. It's creating programs, working with new hires. For me, I think I often will say I love the facilitation, but you mentioned like having a leader that supports you. And I think that's a really great point to keep in mind, because like that's going to trickle down to all those little day-to-day moments that you have. So when you have a leader who supports you, supports your growth, your ideas, and wants to see you grow and develop as a professional, that's going to make every little project that you work on day-to-day so much better. So I really love that. Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe that wasn't as good of an answer to your actual question, but like in L&D, I love the creative piece, which is funny because I think a lot of us don't get into L&D because we want to be creatives, like content creators. But I think that piece is so fun. I love the intentionality around design, and I love trying to make something feel like a high fidelity experience, because so many things in corporate have kind of a mundane tone. And you can surprise people with like pretty quickly just by making something a little elevated. And I think that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought it was an awesome answer to the question, because like you said too, for you, finding that why is that creativity, getting to flex that muscle of like making something unique, trying something out of the box. And so if you were in an environment where maybe you were stifled by leadership or by your manager who said, don't try that, this is how we do things, don't worry about trying something new, or like didn't give you that creativity, then you probably wouldn't be in the work that you're doing. And so I think that's a lot of us, and I resonate with that too. I love when my manager says, yeah, go ahead and go create a custom GPT that people can do a live role play with. Like, it's super fun. And so having that leadership that really supports you, being able to be creative and do the things that you love the most is really going to make your job the best.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is worth speaking to for your audience, you know, just as an AI plug. I don't want everything to be AI or for every post that they see to be AI, but vibe coding, if you're an instructional designer right now, is absolutely worth your time. To be able to produce a simulation with hundreds of variables and that basically acts like an online board game, and plug in an AI with semantic cues so that it can speak to the decisions you make and provide feedback for 20 participants at once. Like, I shouldn't be able to make that in 5 days. So if you're not experimenting with that, buy one website, work with Lovable, work with ChatGPT, and you can make some solutions that are way more interesting than PowerPoints.
100%. And I am with you. We could do a whole separate episode literally on AI. So if people want to hear about that, I think we'll definitely do a follow-up. And like you and I will be talking about it, I'm sure, down the road, because I'm in the same boat that I'm playing around with vibe coding. People at work were like, what in the world is this? But yeah, there are some really cool tools that you can make that actually make an impact in the workplace. And so I think that's a really great call out, is if you're not playing around with this and you just think no one will shut up about it, it's a good place to just think, hey, let me check this out and just see, can I find an actual use case for the work that I'm doing? And you might be surprised.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. And so to follow up, we've talked a lot about the things that you love the most, but now when it comes to creating learning that's so good that people want to pay for it, what would you say is the biggest challenge in learning and development with that standard?
I think it's the expectations. Like, I think that the expectations in L&D are, well, let me double back here a little bit and rewind. The way that L&D is set up creates some challenges for making high fidelity things, because it doesn't matter often if it's high fidelity or not, because people will use it. And I know that there's a constant battle in L&D, and I'm not trying to push that way where like all learning doesn't have to be a movie or like a video game or like super exciting. I know learning needs to be hard and can be hard, but it also can be high fidelity and it can feel like quality. One of the biggest challenges that we have in L&D when it comes to making high fidelity learning, and when I say high fidelity, let me define so you guys just don't hear that word over and over again. I mean that it signals quality from the beginning, it's intentional, and it's something that people, if they saw, might be willing to pay for. So if you think about yourself and what you might be willing to spend money on, you probably know the things that are going to trigger value for you. And that matters, because if you believe something's valuable, then you're going to invest more in it. So I think in L&D, your audience, your customer, which is your business, your frontline workers, your leaders, they don't have anywhere else to go. You have outside vendors, but they're also kind of playing by the same rules. So what I want to go for is I want to go for like customizable learning, right? Like in-house built learning that feels like it's just as good as something that a mid-level social media influencer could do, because it doesn't take that much more effort to make it a little better. Now, that said, that's not for everything. Like your work aids and your just-in-time materials don't need to be a production that's at the level of Diary of a CEO studio, because those just need to be easy to access and easy to use. That's the primary thing. Put them right where they're working.
Yeah. Well, and I think you made a really important distinction there when you were talking about like, so initially people think learning needs to be fun, and we try and gamify things that don't need to be gamified and create a Super Mario game for compliance training. And it's like, that might not be the case, but you did mention while learning is hard, it needs to be hard and high quality. And so I think that was a really important distinction you made, because if learning is hard because it wasn't designed with intentionality, and it's hard because it's maybe a poor user experience, that's not hard for the sake of learning. That's just hard for maybe the lack of effort or the lack of quality. So I can see where you mentioned there that like if a course is hard to take because you can't figure out the navigation, that's not hard learning. But if you're doing some learning and it's challenging because you're doing a role play and you can't figure out the right response, or because the feedback shows you gaps in your knowledge and gaps in your performance, and it's hard in that way, that's very different. And so you mentioned like having this idea in your mind of like, I can at least do what a mid-level social media influencer would do, like making sure that the audio quality is not detracting from the message, making sure that the video quality is clear, and making sure that the message is clear, so that when someone is learning from the experience, it's a meaningful one, so that the challenge comes really from the learning. The challenge comes from the skill development and not from the interaction itself. Is that a fair way to describe that?
Yeah, totally. And I think like just to add to that, the reason that it becomes a challenge is not because we don't have the skills to do the things, or we don't have the passion to do the thing, because it's just different. It's fundamentally different in incentives. Like if I'm a social media influencer, I get instant feedback from my audience about whether or not something's good, right? I get comments, or I get 0 views, or I get no shares, or I get lots of that. And I start to see signals of what matters to my audience, what the value is. And I feel like in L&D, if you make something subpar, you just won't hear about it afterwards, right? Because it's good enough, right? Like it did have all of the legal pieces that needed to be hit, or all the legal beats that needed to be hit for that session. And it did have a quiz, and you could track it. And so like the leader's not going to come back and say, can we make this better? And the audience is going to grumble while they take it. And they're going to maybe watch something else while they take it and then run through the quiz, right? But there's just like not a big feedback loop. But that feedback loop does exist. It's just long term. So like if you're an L&D person and you're wondering why the organization doesn't take you very seriously, or you feel like the organization is investing less and less trust in you over time, I think this is an important mindset shift to say, like, if my leaders could choose to either buy my product or buy a competitor's product, then like, would they choose mine? Because that's how you need to be making the content. So it's good enough that people would spend money on it.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a really helpful feedback loop to keep in mind, because you mentioned as a social media creator, like, you get likes, you get views, you get impressions. And on the flip side, from a learning perspective, you might get course completions. And I think very similarly to social media, those can be seen as vanity metrics. It's like just because a post got 50 likes, it might not have been the best post or the greatest post, but it served whatever purpose that was. And so like you got to pay attention to those feedback metrics, like you were saying, is like, what are the signals I'm getting from leadership? Did they really get the value, or was it just good enough to the point that they're not going to complain and they're not going to let you know that it wasn't everything they hoped it could have been?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so to follow up with that, I'm just curious, Tom, when in your career did you start having this realization or this mindset shift of the standard for my work needs to be so good that people would buy it?
Well, I don't think any of us start there, right? So that's a really good question to lead into, because I think that one of the dangers of a conversation like this, or of some of the points that I'm making, is that someone who's just getting started in instructional design or as a trainer at a company is like, well, I'm not making high fidelity content and I don't have the skills or the resources to do that. And so it's too hard. I mean, just to nerd out and take it back to like a learning theory, right? Like Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. If you put something out of the range of what someone can reasonably do with help, they won't try. They'll lose motivation. So you still want to stretch people, but I'm not trying to say that everyone needs to just be there right now. So in answer to your question about like when I made that shift, I started like everybody else. I was working in training. I knew I wanted to be involved in people talent in some way, but I knew there had to be more than just facilitating all day and making PowerPoints. And then I got introduced to the typical programs we all have to learn, like Captivate and Storyline. And I got excited about those programs. I didn't know their limitations, but I think it was reasonable for me to be excited about being able to do some things that I'd never been able to do before. When I moved to that next role, The director I have, and I'll just call her out, Lauren Totticini, is the director of learning and development at Aptiv, and she's fantastic. She's really a creative in a learning role. So she hired me, and I stepped in, and I was asked to do a training on like goals or something like that. And I made like a storyline video, basically, which is a big mistake. So it was like storyline images fading in and out, and some audio. I used a Blue Yeti to record. It was slow paced. It was so boring. Not a terrible script, but the fidelity was like not anything anyone would ever watch, right? And I was kind of proud of it. And I, took it into her, and we had a meeting about leveling up my abilities, basically. But she kind of challenged me to stretch myself. And I was uncomfortable because I didn't get into learning and development because I was interested in doing things like graphic design and video work and things like that. But then when I started to get into that creative side and see like this whole thing come together, I think it was a big missing piece for me, where like you could have all of these like grandiose ideas about the content you can create, and then you're limited to like storyline and captivate and like rise, and you're like, I can't really do that much. And so her challenging me to level up my visual design helped a lot. And it made me kind of stress and stretch. But then at some point, a lot of those 1% challenges and a lot of those stretches got me to the point where I felt like I could do higher quality work faster. Can I deviate a little bit?
Please do, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to say something that might be a little controversial, okay? But I think that we may have overcorrected sometimes for perfectionism, because there's a wrestle that happens when you have a vision for something and you don't quite know how to do it, and you're challenging yourself in a lot of different ways. And even if you got that little 1 to 2% difference, it wouldn't make a big difference. And so anyone would tell you, Joseph, you don't need to do that. It's not worth it. It's good enough, right? Yeah. But after sessions and sessions of those 1 to 2% stretches and explorations and wrestling with things, you start to break into a new tier of possibility and way you can see things, right? Yeah. And it feels painful at first, and it doesn't feel worth it because it's so small, but those little things eventually add up until in the same speed and the same pace you could do your other things. Now you can present something or create something at a higher fidelity. So I don't want people to be perfectionists in the real sense of perfectionism, but I do want people to have an ideal, and I want them to wrestle towards that ideal, because I think that's how you stretch your skills.
Yeah. I mean, your stories and what you were just talking about helped me reflect in a lot of ways too, because you mentioned it's not about being perfect and having the most high fidelity, like everything's got to be 4K, perfect audio, those types of things. But when we can be creative, we also can take that creativity to push ourselves out of our comfort zone. And also you mentioned like the zone of proximal development, having that more knowledgeable other that can support you. Yeah. And you reminded me of my old manager that I worked with at Vivint, Ashley Martin. Shout out Ashley. if you ever listen to this, right? But yeah, he was really great at the creative side of things. I remember when I was brand new, we were doing like a competition for the install technicians. And I was thinking in my mind of like, are we creating a course for this? Are we creating a job aid? And he was like, no, we're actually doing a podcast. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And then he was like, do you want to be on the podcast? And at that time I was like, oh my goodness, I don't want to be on camera. I don't want to be recorded. Like, this is so outside of my comfort zone. But he was a great example. He pushed me to be creative. He pushed me to just try it. Yeah. And it ended up being super fun. Like, I saw the end result, and we created this really informative podcast episode that talked about work skills. And it was fun. And like you said, we got good feedback from it, that people listened to it, they enjoyed it, and it was fun. And he was also fantastic at creating just the most gorgeous looking slide decks. And it helped me realize too that like initially I would take the brand guidelines that I got from the organization, and I wouldn't dare tweak a thing. I'd just use the fonts, use the colors, and make the deck. But he would make these just beautiful, gorgeous presentations, and he got really great feedback, and it was really well received by the people that we were creating enablement materials for. And so that creative vision that you talk about, where we say, yeah, this is good enough, but can I be creative? Can I push the limits a little bit more? Really, I think makes a big difference in the end, because when we push ourselves out of our comfort zone and maybe bring in someone else who's more skilled than us, whether that's a manager or a coworker who's skilled, or in this case, like, you're really great at this in-person setup, that you came and helped me set up lights and set up cameras and go beyond my normal low fidelity MVP podcast episode with just my laptop. Like, it makes a big difference, and it's fun to try something different, and you learn a lot from it.
Well, and you stretched me here too, right? Like, it's good to stretch in both directions, because like if it was up to me, I'd have mirrorless cameras, I'd have right, like, so that I have better depth, so there's like, we've got more blur in the background, we'd set up what's going up behind us, right? So this isn't like when I say high fidelity, like Like, I'm not trying to claim high fidelity in everything or saying don't post something that isn't like exceptional, right? I think we have an audience or a world of people that are interested in that authenticity. But I also think it's great to be interested in stretching excellence, right? Like, what can you do there? And as you talked about your manager and that experience there, I have one caveat and then one thing to say. So my one caveat is like, when I got pushed to do this stuff, it like lit something in me a little bit that I didn't know I was interested in. Because I never took like art classes or been interested in most artsy based things, and watching a lot of movies doesn't count, right? Like, even though there's some art there. But when I was stretched into thinking a little bit more like an artist, it changed. Like, I didn't realize that that was an interest in me. So if you're not like that, if you're like, you know what, man, I like things made in spreadsheets for people who like spreadsheets, like, that's great. Like, I like that stuff too. I have nothing against that. But partner with someone that can do some of the other stuff, know where your strengths are, because there's high fidelity in both spaces, right? And again, shout out to Lauren Totticini, who's that awesome director. One thing that Lauren consistently does at Aptive is she like makes a separate style guide for like each department. And then every once in a while she'll reinvent that. And go to the marketing team to see if she can use different fonts and do other things like that and different colors. And so there was always like different themes, but all within the same style. And there was times when I was frustrated because I was like, we could do this faster if we weren't trying to reinvent the brand, right? Every time we did this. And I think that that's true sometimes, and she knows that. But at the same time, that was an excellent school for me to experiment with that type of stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I honestly love the tie-in back to the beginning of the interview when you mentioned what you love most about your work is having a leader that supports you and that pushes you. And that's exactly what we're talking about here, is being able to have someone who can challenge you to be creative. And whether it's you're the one being creative or you're collaborating with other people who also have that fire for that creativity, we can work together to level things up and really push the materials and the experiences that we create to another level. And so I'm curious, do you have a specific experience in mind where this standard of shooting for learning so good people would buy it, where you saw that really make a difference for the business?
I have an experience, and it's a silly one, that like surprised me. And just to tie off the end of our conversation on leaders, and I think everyone should memorize this phrase and think about it in job interviews and job applications, who you work for is so much more important than where you work.
Yeah,
like,
amen.
Your leader makes all the difference in the world, and I've been lucky to have some great leaders. So, but back to your question about the when I saw that make a difference. I had already been stretched a lot at Aptive in some of these creative capacities, but they were still in some traditional mediums, right? There was still a lot of PowerPoint, there was still a lot of PDFs. But then we had a COO, and he kept saying, we need more TikTok training. We need like TikTok training. And we weren't doing anything like that. And I know that's superficial, guys. Like, I know that it's not about just the medium, but I do think if you don't capture people's attention in the first place, then it doesn't matter what material you make or how informative it is. And so I was like, okay, like, I'll make a TikTok training. And I was being a little facetious. And so I like mimicked some styles. It was pretty bombastic. Like, there was lots of zaps and pows and like water drops and stuff, like sound effects. And I sent it to this guy and I was like, here's a TikTok training. And it was a series on P&L. And I just did the first video. I did it with my phone camera, edited it in Camtasia. And the response like really surprised me. Like, he loved it. He shared it with the CEO. He's like, this is what we're looking for. We want this kind of content. And immediately they were like, we want 12 more videos like this. So anyways, we made this series of videos on TikTok trainings, and I thought maybe this guy just loves it. And then the managers, we call them operation managers. They're basically like GMs for different pest control sites at Aptive. The response was like overwhelmingly positive. And then when I reached out later, when I was building my portfolio to say, hey, could you speak to this? Like, some of those people really surprised me in their response by saying things like, yeah, that was the most fun training I've ever experienced. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I'm just saying that when you subvert people's expectations in a way that looks like something that they would choose to consume in their free time, like, it does something, especially when what they expect is a boring video or just a bunch of text.
Yeah, no, 100%. I love that. And I love that you had such great feedback, and it was something that you could add to your portfolio, and it became this story that you're able to continue to share and inspire other people to be able to do the same. And so I kind of want to tie back to something you touched on earlier, is sometimes it can be intimidating. You're hearing people talk about this breaking out of the norm, being super creative, trying something new, and it can be intimidating. And maybe for somebody that's either new to the field, new in their career, or maybe they're an individual contributor and feel like they don't have maybe the authority to do something so out of the box. Where would you recommend that somebody starts if they're thinking, I want to level up the work that I do, I want to make learning that's so good people would pay for it? Where would you recommend somebody start if they're like, this just feels like it's 100 leagues away from where I'm at today?
To me, those are two separate questions, but really good ones, right?
Yeah.
So one question is, how do I make learning so good people will pay for it? And the other question is like, how do I level up my own skills to be able to make higher quality things? So I'll start with the first one, and it's a really simple answer. And the answer is copy people.
Yeah.
Like, it makes a huge difference. When you think about art class or most types of creative endeavors, like, you don't learn by, like, your teacher doesn't give you a sketch pad and a pencil and say, make me a masterpiece, right? They say, here's a picture that someone else drew, copy this picture, let me show you how to do that. And you copy them and you kind of learn what's going on there. And I think we have a resistance to that because we don't want to be fake, we don't want to be superficial, we don't want to take credit for work that other people did, right? And I think that's reasonable. So first off, yeah, give credit. Like, be like, oh, I was inspired by this. But almost all of the skills that I've gained by looking at something that I thought was exceptional and saying, how do I do that? Like, how do I make a video look more like that? How do I make a work aid look more like this? How do I level up? Why do I love this presentation? Oh, it's the texture. Like, I love the texture. Okay, I guess I just love like concrete texture and drywall texture. Okay, like, let me, and you start to like play around and start to see that. But if you mimic people, I think eventually that skill starts to turn into your own opinions about things. One other recommendation, did you take Professor McDonald's theory class? Not the learning theory class, but like I can't remember what the class was called. There was a book by Nelson and Stolterman. It was called Design Theory or something like that.
I actually don't think I did take that class. I should have.
Okay.
If I could go back, I'd tell myself to.
Okay, well, they have a recommendation in there that I think is really great, and it's right along the same line of copy people. And so the next level down from copy people for me would be to critique other people's work. And when I say critique, I'm not saying like go in there and be like, this is what's wrong with, so-and-so's work. But like, when you start to critique something, when I say critique, I mean, you look at something and say, what's good about this? What would I do different about this if it was up to me? It starts to strengthen that muscle of preference and judgment that you have to do creative things with. And the more of that you're exposed to, the more you make those preferences. And I think ironically, that's what leads into the skill for copying. As you see something, you kind of copy it. You can or can't quite copy it perfectly. You start to put your own spin on it. And pretty soon you've developed your own preferences and opinions and judgment calls around some of those things. And so number one, copy people. Number two, if you could expose yourself to other people's work and critique it on a regular basis, it'll help you see your own work in a light that opens up opportunities to make it better.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And it makes me even just reflect on my own creative growth and journey because, like, for this example, podcasting right now, we're recording, and I think of how I kind of copied because podcasting was something that I kind of learned about through my work. And then I loved listening to Dr. Luke Hobson's podcast. And then my buddy Russell Sweep, the L&D Hot Seat, were both shows that I loved listening to through the program. So shout out Luke and shout out Russell. And they actually asked me to come on their podcasts. And that was like what kind of sparked that fire of, this is fun. I want to do this more often. Yeah. And as I started coming up with, how do I want to do my show? What's the title? How do I decide who my guest should be? And what is the flow? I copied. I went to their episodes and I listened to them and I paid attention to the way that they spoke and the way that they interviewed and the way that they showed active listening. And they were great examples. So I tried to copy. And I think, like you said, that gave me a good starting point. And then I'm able to critique not only them, but then also my own work as I get into it more, as I put out my own work. So I love that you made that so simple, is to identify people that you can critique. That kind of gives you that more knowledgeable other to pull you in that zone of proximal development, pull you out of your comfort zone into that growth zone. And maybe you have to do a little bit of research to figure out, like, why does someone else's video look so much better than mine? Or why does someone else's course flow so much smoother than mine? Or why do they facilitate with so much power and influence? And how can I do that? You're going to have to do some work. Yeah. But when you have that person, you try and copy them, it's going to help us to be so much better.
Yeah. Can I make one call out too?
Yeah, please.
On top of that, like, I would imagine that there might be someone someday who watches this video and they listen to us talk about how important high fidelity things are. And they say, okay, but that setup's like so-so. Right? Like, while they're looking at us and they're like, this guy's talking about doing a good, and I think that actually helps us make a really important point. I'm not trying to say, again, don't do an MVP. Like, this is still an MVP of sorts, right? Like, we could wrestle with this and make it better and better. But the point is, like, we also could have just sat down and not tried at all.
Yep.
right? And not tried to stretch or see what we could make this. And we didn't. We tried something new. And if you and I do this again, we'll probably do it a little bit better next time. And you'll have to put up with me being like, oh, move the camera to the left. Okay, move the camera to the right. Like, as we like try to tweak things. Or maybe I'll be like, Joseph, unless we have DSLRs or mirrorless, we're not doing it again. You know, like, so we can level out the experience. I hope if you're watching this and you're thinking, well, this video is like, look at those angles, look at this small room, look at the, like, I hope you're not thinking that. I hope you're realizing that we're not saying everything just has to be perfect. Just stretch yourself and grow a little every time. Most of my video work I do is just me. I'm in there with a teleprompter. I have my setup. I've got my background and everything taken care of. And so this, for me, is a stretch to figure out, okay, how would I do a two-person interview? Do I have all the equipment I need for a two-person interview? So that's the only caveat. I just want to put that out there.
Yeah. And I love that it comes back to that feedback loop that you talked about too, is you got to take that feedback and work with it. And if you never ship something, going back to the MVP, is like, if you never send it out and let people see it and critique it, then you can't get better too. And so we do our best, we're creative, we stretch ourselves, and then you send it out and get people's feedback. And then when they say, oh, that angle was weird or whatever, then we take that and we grow from it and we get better. So I think the same is in the workplace, is when you try something new, you try something creative, maybe you try and do a themed, funny training. We did just recently, a couple weeks ago, we did in-person trainings and we themed them after TV shows and movies. It was themed after The Office. It was themed after Harry Potter. It was fun. And then we had to take the feedback of, I've never seen that show. I've never watched Harry Potter. It's like, okay, that's something to take in mind for the future so that we can tweak that and improve and get better.
I know there's a ton of people that do what we do that have imposter syndrome. Like, you don't need to. You're not an imposter for wanting excellence and doing excellence at the level that you can do it. Just stretch yourself. Like, be comfortable with that. And that's authentic. Like, it's authentic for you to stretch yourself and to be excellent in the ways that you can.
Yep, definitely. And throughout this conversation, you and I have both mentioned a lot of leaders, mentors, podcasts, books that we've taken inspiration for that have helped us to grow. So I'm curious, at the end of the day, if someone was like, hey, I want to do this, I want to be more creative, I want to push myself to make learning so good people would pay for it.
Totally.
What resources come to mind that you would recommend people check out to really grow their skills in this way?
I mentioned the two big things, but I'll give another resource. And this resource isn't as much to grow your skills as it is to persuade you that copying people and critiquing things is exactly what you should be doing. So there's a video series on YouTube. I think there's also a website. It's called Everything is a Remix.
Yeah.
And I mentioned it a little earlier, so that I just want to highlight that is an excellent resource. It's a really well done video series where they go through the history of a lot of creative endeavors and show how you almost have, within single generations of people, many generations of iteration on ideas and art and film and all sorts of things like that. And you can kind of tie that back to where it started, where the first thing that maybe inspired that was, and how someone made that their own. So check it out. It's a great series.
Sweet.
I also recommend on your teams, one thing that I did when I was at Aptiv, when I was working more with a team of instructional designers, is I'd bring my team in and we did something we called the instructional design critique. And we would pull stuff from eLearning Heroes and Articulate, or we would pull video content for like online video learning or other things, and we would watch it beforehand, and then we would come in as a group and we would critique it together so that we could stretch that muscle of, what do I love about this that I want to adopt? What do I think could make this 1% better, 10% better? And when you do that, you get to see all of the different choices that this person might have had to make. I'm not saying you did all their work, but you get to put yourself in the seat of making a lot of those design decisions. And that really strengthens that muscle of judgment of, I'm going to make a call about A or B.
That's awesome. And then we'll go through, and so the video series is going to be really great for that idea of like copying people and being mindful. And I love that idea of doing a critique activity as a team. So then it really takes those two pieces of advice that you gave and makes it applicable, that you can do it ongoing. You can just reflect on how copying people or resources that you admire can really push us. And then also being critical in our thinking and our feedback, and getting that feedback from peers, from team members, from leaders. That's huge. And so, Tom, thank you so much for having this discussion. I know it's been really helpful for me just thinking about how I can push myself, push my creativity, and then gauge, is my learning so good that people would be willing to pay for it? And so as we come to a wrap, for people that want to keep hearing from you and want to follow more of your work and what you're doing, where can people connect with you and find your work?
Yeah, probably LinkedIn. LinkedIn's probably the best place. If you're a corporate L&D person, you're interested in my corporate like L&D work, LinkedIn is probably the best place. I share short form videos there usually about some of my ideas around the way we should approach our work in L&D, as well as some of the things that I'm testing and trying with AI right now. So you can see a lot of content there. The other thing that I do outside of my 9 to 5 is I work with micro-influencers to build courses they can sell as digital products.
Cool.
So if people are interested in that or in some of the consulting that I do on a corporate level, you can go to overtime.courses, and I've got a website there where you can see some of the services I provide and the work I do. But awesome. I really appreciate you having me today. It was great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the time and for just sharing so many great resources and great perspectives. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, that's a wrap. Tom, thank you for making the time and for coming in person to record this with me. I appreciate how practical you made this. Big takeaways I'm walking away with are treat learning like a product, build tighter feedback loops and completions, and level up by copying what great looks like and critiquing it until you develop your own taste. If you want to connect with Tom, find him on LinkedIn. He also mentioned his work with micro-influencers and course building at overtime.courses. I'll put the link in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to Talk Learning with me and leave a review. It helps more learning professionals to find the show. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll talk soon.